So whenever I talk to an audience, I want to give you maybe an arc to understand who you are and where you're growing to. And I've heard several comments about the growth of your community and where you're going to be. I think this is relatable for Assemblyman Watts. If you want to see the way that I started my life, this is me when I was 3 months old and I had hair, and this is my path. So I'm on a path to be my grandfather, whether I like it or not. Um, there's some good things and bad things about it, or more importantly, my parents, again, when I had hair. I'm going to be my dad, whether I like it or not. So being an Italian, I like to eat a lot of bad food for me. Can't change that. I also can't change my DNA, that there's a genetic history that I have in my family, and I have to watch out for it. So my family's got a history of heart disease. My dad had a 5 bypass heart surgery. It's like that's in me. So I have to grow accordingly and make sure that I'm watching my diet, exercising, doing some things to fight this heart issue. Cities are no different. So who's your model? Who does Las Vegas want to be when it grows up? What kind of growth model are you doing? So I'm going to show you a lot of information going forward. And I've heard several comments today of growth issues, things that you're trying to avoid. Well, what is it? Are you trying to avoid being Los Angeles? Are you trying to avoid being another place? Understand what that is, understand your model, understand the heart attack you could have, and then plan accordingly. So it's that simple. So let's talk about where I am now. I'm in Asheville, completely different issues from y'all, up in the mountains, about 4 hours northeast of Atlanta. Blue Ridge Mountains, we have a lot of water here because we're the South. Bluegrass music, because we have a lot of water, we make a lot of beer. We have 40 breweries in town. A lot of our beer makes it out to you, which is great. You can have some of our water. And like any quirky little mountain town, we have men dressed as nuns on tall bikes that eat fire. It's your typical little place. Well, Asheville didn't start this way. Asheville was the second largest city in North Carolina, and then it fell flat on its face in the Depression and didn't really come out until the 1990s. This is a shot from the 1990s of our downtown. We had all these boarded up buildings all over the place, and we had a very anti-urban attitude of this isn't who we are. We're not urban people, we're mountain people. There are a lot of people that were involved in change, but the one that's most closely related to me is Julian Price. I worked for his company, Public Interest Projects. We're actually still in their offices, and it's a for-profit real estate developer. So our job was to, Julian basically bequeathed $15 million into a for-profit real estate development company that fixed buildings and started businesses. So kind of like Tony Hsieh doing it in Las Vegas, but we're talking the 1990s, taking buildings like this and basically making apartments happen. Not real rocket science, it's just fixing buildings, but it was running against the way that the industry saw housing and redevelopment in the 1990s. This was, people didn't want to live downtown back then. That's the numbers didn't show it. So we were turning that system around. What we found is that we're in this constant conversation about data. What does it mean to our community to fix downtown? We were equally reviled in our community. People on the left thought that because we're real estate developers, we're evil. All developers are evil in an environmental community. We're very environmental here. And on the right, people thought because we're doing stuff downtown, we were subsidized. And so we had to explain to both sides that this is how cities operate. There's a land production to it. If you talk to any farmer, a farmer is going to have this economic model of talking about things. What's the water per acre, the crop yield per acre, all of that. So let's talk about our building. This is a building that we rehab. So the city did the streetscape project. So thank you, city, for the garbage can, the bike rack, 2 benches, and a street tree. That's awesome. I mean, that's a subsidy at our front door. Okay, fine. We took the taxable value from $300,000 to $11 million. So what the community got in that fixing of that building to make retail, office, and residential above it, that's a 3,500% increase in taxes in 15 years, which is an explosive growth of revenue. So go out and buy 3,500% more garbage cans. So we don't care. This is about cultivating community wealth. So do you have a 401k plan that grows by 3,500%? No. So how are you going to get new wealth in your community? And this is on an existing piece of infrastructure. And again, there were biases. People are just like, well, Joe, that's cute and everything. We've got this, that's $11 million. We've got this Walmart at 20. Okay, fair enough. It took 34 acres of my farm to make that Walmart versus the 0.2 acres of our building. So that's an apples and oranges argument right there if you're using the gross value. So rather than total value, what's the taxes per acre yield off these things. So we're producing 100 times more property taxes to the city and the county and the school system than they are. Double the retail taxes. Who would have thought that a tattoo shop, a beauty salon, and a furniture store is more tax productive than a Walmart? But it is. Gross, Walmart's doing a lot, but it took a lot of acres to get there. Obviously, we have more residential and we have more jobs. This is it. This is basically all that we do when we do economics. It's not complex. People are just like, well, obviously economics is a hard problem to solve. It's all this complex math. And it's like, no, just think about it in the way that we talk about econometric modeling, or another way of thinking about it. Could y'all imagine if we're all having a conversation about these cars here, and I started bragging about my pickup truck getting 650 miles per tank? You'd immediately laugh at me and go, Joe, come on now. All tanks are different sizes. We don't say miles per tank. We say miles per gallon. Oh, the numbers just changed. And we should all be driving BMW Asettas at 70 miles per gallon. Sorry to the Prius owners, but 1955 technology is more efficient. We do this for a $4 commodity. Shouldn't we be doing this for a $4 million commodity of our dirt? And it's kind of perplexing to me that we don't make things apples to apples this way, and we don't have a standardized conversation about economics. And the taxes and the productivity matters, because this is how you pay for your government. So back to Asheville. We're a $15 million investor in a $100 million portfolio. That's what downtown was worth. And we didn't get a new building in downtown until 2008. So what you see there is the value of historic preservation. That value of $500 million was sitting there, all those empty stories upstairs, just waiting to get used. So you see a value jump of 5 times. Now, to show you that it's not all love and roses in Asheville, these are some actual campaign ads from this guy, Chris Peterson here. Here he is running for council, complaining about the city, because in defense of the city, they actually started investing in the downtown first, and they invested in streetscape projects, parking garages, $26 million. $26 million is a lot of money, and Chris is pretty pissed off about it. Here's downtown development for bureaucrats instead of water, sewer, streets for our citizens. Y'all got people like Chris in your community? Everybody does. And it's like, all right, fine. Chris is complaining about money, $26 million. Let's do some math here. If you invest $26 million on a $100 million asset, and it grows fivefold to 500 million, is investing 26 and yielding $430 million, is that a good return on investment? Yeah. Why the hell do you listen to Chris? And you're not going to stop Chris. Trust me, you will not. I drink beers with Chris. Chris is a riot. Chris has a website with fire and brimstone. This is the mayor getting hit with a lightning bolt. By the way, he misspelled charlatans, but you're not going to stop people like Chris. They're operating as almost like a religious belief about how cities and communities operate. And I'm not going to leave the left out of this too. Both right and left is guilty of this, and not understanding the economic flow of what a city is and the cash flow of how it operates. Because quite honestly, we are wired to not do math. This is actually psychology, that we have we're programmed to misevaluate and misjudge things when it comes to mathematics. People just don't like to do math. I'll give you one of my favorite stories. This is actually an NPR article from the 2011. Indiana charged people, I see it down here at the bottom, $40 to $50 for each student to ride the bus. And the theory was, this is Indiana. They're like, look, you're choosing to live further out. You should pay for the bus, because that's a transportation system. It's not an education system. So if you choose to live further away, you're paying for the transportation system. So this guy, Jeff Bennett, is complaining because he spends a half hour each way to drop his kid off at school. So, okay, that's a math problem. Let's kind of put on our high school hats for a second and do the math problem of Jeff spends 30 minutes each way, which is about an hour a day. He's going to do this 20 times a month. So if Jeff is making the average Indiana per hour rate, and I looked it up, it's $28 an hour, he's spending $560 a month to drop his kid off to school to save $40. Or another way of putting it, Jeff is losing $520 a month with his decision. This is how bad we are at math. Or, okay, hey, Joe, you're being rude. Maybe Jeff is indigent. He's really poor. Let's drop him down to below poverty rate at $10 an hour. He's still spending $200 a month, or he's losing $160 a month. Either way you look at his decision, he's losing money. Why would he choose to do this? And this is, I see this time and time again, that people just don't do the math on this stuff, and we just miss all the stuff that's hiding in plain sight. But there is another piece of the story is someone that's trained as a planner that needs to be talked about. The reason why he's driving his kid is because there's no sidewalks. Okay, let's just solve that problem and bring some sidewalks into this. So as we talk about our communities, we have to have the humility to kind of step out and see what are the problems what the people are struggling with and what's going on from a mathematical standpoint. So we have to bring the data forward into the conversation, but also understand what a city is. And you all are struggling with this right now. It's a finite boundary of land that has to be managed. How those land units are managed currently in contemporary, at a contemporary basis is critical before you start adding to that pile. And so if we're a $15 million real estate development corporation sitting inside another thing called the city is actually incorporated too. If you look up the word incorporate in the Oxford American Dictionary, it says to constitute a city, a company, or other organization as a legal corporation. By law, the city of Las Vegas is incorporated, Clark County is incorporated, the state of Nevada is incorporated, and so is our country. Joe Biden said this on the Stephen Colbert show, the United States is the largest corporation in the world. I'm such a nerd that I looked it up. And by the way, if there's any lawyers on this webinar, there's the US code at the bottom of the slide that lists us as a federal corporation. So this isn't to say that we're a capitalist corporation, we're a social corporation. There is a cooperative relationship between the private landowner and the public facilities that make it all work. So do the taxes pay for the cost of stuff? So in my city is worth $14 billion, which is 7 times the value of Ted Turner. Is Ted Turner making his decisions based off who's whining on Facebook? Of course not. He's looking at that, but that's not how his decisions are being made. So if my community is 7 times the potency of that, we should be taking 7 times the intellectual understanding of the numbers in this, because I take this very seriously about what my corporation is doing. So knowing your tax system is the critical foundation of how this all operates. We were doing a project in Florida. And when we wander into a state, we have to figure out the tax system. We actually created a taxes for dummies guide for ourselves to kind of like figure out how the tax system works. And we have like all 50 states worked out this way. In North Carolina, it's kind of simple. We have a market value. We do have a couple of exemptions, but in Florida, they have straight up exemptions to get to the taxable value. And then they have a mill rate to get their tax bill. That's how it operates. So if you're commercial, let's just take $100,000 of commercial and $100,000 of residential at a valuation standpoint. Right out the door, you get a homestead exemption of $50,000 off the top. That's awesome because that's Florida. They actually made a constitutional amendment to make that happen. They get a second exemption for $50,000, but for the school district, which is thrown on top, which is awesome. So if you look at the millage rate, the city is paying 5 mills. This is for Oviedo, Florida, outside of Orlando. This is the school system. So people are paying more to the school than the city. And then here's the county at double the city rate. So for people that are in the city of Oviedo, they're paying 2 times the ratio of taxes to Seminole County. So that begets the question, do they get 2 times the service of Seminole County for what they pay for the services that they're paying in the city? And oftentimes people aren't aware of that. They're actually paying into the county coffers out of the city and not getting a commensurate level of services back. So be aware of that, understand the taxes, but here's the tax bill. You can see residential gets a very handsome discount on that same number of value. Here's where it gets better because this gets closer to y'all. They did another amendment called the Save Our Homes Amendment that restricted and capped the growth of value in commercial to 10%, and residential is capped way below that at 3% or CPI, which is ever lower of the two. So right out the door, commercial is going to be paying more in taxes than residential by a factor of 3 at the very least. This is probably one of the weirdest restrictions I've seen, but you would see why the voter would vote for this. There's actually this great old colonial barb, don't tax me, don't tax thee, tax the fella behind the tree. People don't like to pay taxes. So it feels good as a voter to not pay for government. Awesome. You still have to run stuff. So this is the way that it works in Florida with the tax system. You see the blue line up here is the market value. That's what's going on with the market value. And you see how high up the market value is from the assessed value down there before the bust, the last recession. So it feels good when you see the market take off and you know that you're being capped and restricted down. Well, the problem is money flows over time. So when you see what happens after the recession and then the market takes back off again, the value of housing suppresses and it climbs out at that lower rate because it's got a cap on top of it. So let me ask you a question. The price of gasoline, the price of asphalt, is it following the blue line or the red line? It's following the blue line. So the irony is that cap actually makes government more unaffordable. You can't pay for more things. You can't get another teacher because teacher salaries, you want them to grow with the market's growing, right? So they've capped themselves, just to show you how perverse it is. It was 1.4% growth in the value of income for that community, which is not great. When you look at, let's just look at asphalt. This is the state's own guide on asphalt and what the state pays in asphalt. It's paying 3% of growth and the income is being capped at 1.4%. You all have a cap too. And this is a chart of asphalt from the Federal Reserve. They've got the data on it. And if you look at last year, this is index is about 280 index in asphalt. And now it's grown to 360. So just last year, asphalt grew by close to 30% of value just in 1 year. Is your revenue growing at that? So it feels good to cap ourselves, but we have to realize the reality of life is that things don't fall at that value. And we're all talking about inflation, right? So that price of lumber, that price of concrete, that object, that police car that you have to buy for your city. This is how we shoot ourselves in the foot. So just be aware of this stuff. And I find that we just don't ask the right questions when we talk about government. We get caught in this kind of drama of how we want to think government operates without doing the math of how it operates. So I'm going to give you our five simple steps. One is you want to do things apples to apples. That's why we recommend per acre analysis. You want to understand how your rules affect your revenues and how they create inadvertent subsidies. So that's a key indicator, like what I just showed you with the tax cap. You want to consider all land uses in a data-driven way. Just start to let your biases go and just look at the economics of it. We would argue that you want to visualize it, show it in a way that people can understand it, and let people know that these are choices that they're making. And I'll get to that in a second. And then finally, you're never going to get it right. Do policies, see how they work. If they're not working for you, change them. Move on. Just realize that this is adaptive. Nobody is a god. We're all human. We're going to make mistakes. So just understand that along the way. We've done work in 35 different states now, mashing up all of the Canada, New Zealand, Australia. When you mash up all of the data, this is what you see on a per acre basis. For every dollar of county taxes per acre, somebody out in the unincorporated county is paying to the county. Their brother or sister in the prime city is paying about 5 times that to the county. This is a Walmart, this is a mall, this is a 2-story building, 3-story building, and a 6-story building. I don't have a skyscraper in here. So when you look at the old traditional Main Street, you can see this potency, this punch that it gets. This could be in Driggs, Idaho, or Durham, North Carolina. It doesn't matter. When you stack those stories, you're stacking your wealth, period. The bigger the parking lot you have, the more you're wasting your real estate, the more tax break you're getting. That's the reason why the Walmart and the mall looks the way that it does. It's that simple. When I first started doing this stuff, people are just like, Joe, you just hate Walmart. And I'm like, you're totally missing the point. In fact, I'll show you what kind of nerd I am. I presented at the International Association of Tax Assessing Officers. I don't know if there's any tax officers in here. Not the most dynamic crowd on the planet. It makes a planning conference feel like Burning Man by comparison. This is like one of the squarest conferences I've ever went to, but they're super awesome people. Mad props to them. They're like math nerds. But this guy got up and did this amazing presentation on how cheap Walmarts are. The head of Walmart's real estate gets up, does the keynote presentation at 8 a.m, showing spreadsheet after spreadsheet on how cheap Walmarts are. I'm in the back of the room thinking, this is awesome. This guy's getting all of his property tax lowered in one meeting. That's efficient. So I went up to the microphone. I said, Mr. Terrell, what's the useful life of one of your buildings? And he honestly shot back 15, 20 years. We're designing the building to depreciate as fast as possible. We'll build another building and depreciate it down again. We can maximize the depreciation on our buildings. We want to pay the lowest taxes possible. From the mouth of babes. This is your decision in your community, however. Is this the deal that you wanted? Is this what you were expecting in your tax system, that you would have people with a 15-year relationship with you? Is that what you want? Do you want somebody to maximize and take your wealth? The average Walmart consumes more in police services than it pays in property taxes. Did you all know that? Do the math on this. So if you're cool with it, if you're cool with that relationship, 15 years, I mean, that's the life cycle of a cat. Okay, it's your decision, go for it. Just make sure that you're consciously choosing that. And people don't see this because we're not doing the math on it. So the way that we do these models is kind of tantamount to a doctor showing you your brain. Your brainstem activity is the blue stuff. Your creative thought process is the green stuff. So can we do an economic MRI of your community? So back to Asheville for a second. This is my county, 350 square miles. This big gray area right here is Mount Mitchell, tallest mountain east of the Mississippi. It's not taxable. I don't care about it. Doesn't pay me money. Green is low value. Purple is high value. So this is the Biltmore estate. This is the Vanderbilt mansion, is in this big purple blob right there. It's worth $100 million for one house. Super awesome, right? But it's not a fair way of looking at it because it's 180,000 square foot house sitting on 8,000 acres of land. So this is like having the biggest gas tank. Yes, it's going to be valuable. So rather than total value, let's go to value per acre. The map changed. And let me just show it to you in 3D. So this is how you can see the potency of my county. The time that we made this map, our state legislator called us a cesspool of sin, which was super awesome. And I was on the Downtown Association at the time. And, being a polite Southern town, we're just like, did you really mean that? But in his defense, you've got 2 voters out in the county for every 1 voter in the city. And we had to help with the education to get people to understand that the city isn't a drain on the economics of the county. It's actually a gift to the county. So you can see here, this is downtown Asheville. We're all paying 6 mills across this whole entire model. And you can see that we're the biggest producers of downtown taxes. So for the folks out in Fairview who think they're paying a lot of taxes, they're paying nothing compared to what we're paying in county taxes in downtown, or even Black Mountain over here. This is a little village of 13,000 people. You can see its little downtown popping up compared to ours. Incidentally, you can also see how low wealth the Sprawl is on the south side. It's consuming all that infrastructure, not giving a whole lot of rise in the revenue model. So we're advocates. You have to show people this information. You don't just talk about it. This isn't about kind of hearing about policy. You should show it to folks. And again, another bias that I would get from people is like, okay, that's North Carolina, we're different. So here's Manchester, New Hampshire. Guess where downtown is? Kansas City, Missouri. Guess where downtown is? Bozeman, Montana. Guess where downtown is? And it's not just heads and shoulders above everything else. It's leaps and bounds above everything else. This is how we build wealth. Or another way of thinking about this is the modern American system of building cities. All the stuff that we've experienced in the last 100 years has taken advantage of the fact that you get very low wealth as you spread out. Don't hate the player, hate the game, understand the game. Even in little places, this is Brevard, North Carolina, which is like 8,000 people out in the mountains. The mayor's name is Mayor Jimmy. He works at the hardware store on Main Street. I mean, this is Mayberry, folks. And we did their model, and Mayor Jimmy goes, well, I can tell where downtown is. We're doing a stormwater thing. Can you do the stormwater the same way? And we're like, sure. So we turned the tax system into a monochrome and ran their stormwater model. So downtown is indeed impervious and it sheds a lot of water. Great. You can see it bumping off the map there. But you can also see how the Sprawl area is producing a lot of stormwater. So we dropped one on the other like a jello mold. And you can see that at least the downtown's paying for its taxes. You can see it popping through the model. So we're mountain people. So we did a mountain profile of the tax system. This is the stormwater system. And here's the problem. So in downtown, you have one form of impervious issue, that the surface parking lots that are around Main Street aren't giving a lot of taxes, but they're producing a lot of stormwater. But at least the buildings that they're servicing are kicking back. But out here in Sprawlsville, you're seeing a high level of stormwater runoff and very little taxes. So maybe there should be 2 different ways of handling this. If you want to waste real estate with the big box, we're going to recoup that stormwater fee at a higher level. I mean, just think this through in the ramifications of the tax policy and how it's operating. But since we're talking water, because we seem to have way too much of it here and you don't have enough, we did a project in the Imperial County, California. Brawley was our client. And it's amazing how much lettuce is produced in Imperial County. They're producing 25% of the lettuce of the entire United States in Imperial County. And they're taking a lot of water. Here's your water, by the way. and what you're getting out of the Colorado, and here's what they get. As you struggle and go forward and think about your water limitations, are you going to be able to win against these other places? Are you going to be able to buy enough water rights to be able to service your growth? This is a question y'all need to think about. Or is Arizona going to win? So you're not in a great position when you look at from a water infrastructure standpoint, but you all know that. I'll just leave that there. Retail analysis, we've done that. This is Minneapolis, Minnesota. This is their retail model. When our analyst was doing this, I was like, here's Mall of America, what it produces in retail taxes. And I asked him, I'm like, what's going on with downtown? He's like, well, it's up over here. So this is downtown's retail production compared to Mall of America. Now remember, Mall of America is a 100% monolithically retail thing. That's all it does is it produces retail. But downtown has government buildings, offices, residential, civic buildings, and it's still producing way more retail taxes as a productivity level. We see this time and again. I'll give you another example. This is Durango, Colorado, which you all know. It's kind of isolated in Colorado, southwest corner. There are a couple of businesses that wanted an apples to apples understanding of their books. So Peter Schertz and Tim Wheeler. Peter's got a book shop and Tim's got a coffee shop. They're on Main Street. They gave us their books and we pulled Walmart's data. In Colorado, we could do this, but basically on the right are the footprint of those two businesses. On the left is the footprint of Walmart. On this is the county property taxes produced per acre versus the property taxes paid per acre of the Walmart. Who would have thought that these two little shops are like, was that 15 times the potency? Was that 4 or 5 times the retail tax production? So the cities in Colorado get the retail taxes, the counties get the property taxes. It's generally how that works. But then let's talk about jobs. Who's got more jobs? So not only are they producing more wealth for the community, they got more employment. Let's also ask the next step, like who's paying their retail sector employee more per hour? Is it going to be the small mom and pop or is it going to be Walmart? It's probably going to be the small mom and pop. It may be a nickel or a dime more, but it's going to be more. It's going to return more back to the community. Now, who's hiring the local ad executive, the local attorney, the local website designer? Is the blue side or the gray side? It's the blue side. So we actually inadvertently harm our own local economics if we don't pay attention to this stuff. And again, this isn't default Walmart. It's to understand they're operating on a different system than what we operate on. So when we look around the built environment and say the stuff on the left is happening, or sometimes people will misconstrue this and say this is what people want. It's like, well, yeah, we've priced it at a level that we're exchanging the greenway, the art teacher, or the dancing traffic cop. Y'all don't have dancing traffic cops yet, do you? You don't have that because you've inadvertently wasted it in a form of development. And again, that's that bias that we see where people are saying, well, this is what we want, this is what we're growing into. And we did a series of places in California where they were telling us this is the market. And we're like, well, let's look at this. So another desert city, this is Lancaster, California, which is up and over the mountain from Los Angeles. Here's Lancaster, here's the mountain range, here's Los Angeles. This is their property tax model. This isn't great. They only have one building in downtown that's over 4 stories tall. You can kind of spot it on the model. There are 166,000 people. They should have a bigger purple mountain by now. But the thing that kind of blew my mind is they had 953 miles of roads. I don't know what that looks like, so we put it on a map to show them. So that's a road from Los Angeles to Portland. So as developers give you the roads, it's not a gift, it's a liability into the future. So they have to build a road. Roads only last 50 years. So every 50 years, they have to build a road from Los Angeles to Portland. So talking about choice architecture, would you choose, if you could go back in time, to build a road to Portland? And the answer is no. So we just don't think about it that way. We just allow life to go on. Next thing you know, we've got all of these roads. The other misnomer is that when you look at your budget, if you look at the finance standards for the way that government finance officers handle pipes, roads, any kind of physical stuff, they call them assets. When I sit down with finance officers, I have a whole lot of fun. And like this one woman is like, hey, Lori, I've got a computer. If I had a delivery vehicles in my business or real estate, those are all assets. And she's like, yeah. And I said, so I can sell you the building, the van, or the computer. Can you sell your roads? Can Las Vegas sell their roads to Reno? No, that's a liability now, right? So in real estate world, the way that we look at liabilities or assets is the cash flow. So if I own this mall, let's say, is a real estate developer, I know that that asset needs to be maintained over time in order to get revenue off of it. So every so often I have to replace the air conditioners, and those aren't cheap. Those are going to cost $85,000 a pop. And I'm also going to need a crew for $35,000 for the helicopter and the crew to kind of put them in place. So every 15 to 20 years, that's useful life of an air conditioner. I need to recoup enough money out of the rent to be able to afford to chunk down $205,000 to go through this heart attack in the system. You have to do the same things with your roads. So looking back at those 953 miles, we put them all on a timeline to show them when they all got built. And one of the things that's kind of amazing is look at how few roads they had for their start of life. And then you can see what happened after World War II, particularly 1953 right here, where they added all of these roads. Well, guess what? This came back to haunt their parents' generation in 1983 with the first rebuild. And in the 80s, what a lot of people did is they said, well, hey, we need money. So they let out more development. They annexed more land. They wanted to get more money, more taxes. So they did more development, but you picked up more roads with it. You can see it right here with this amount of lane miles that was added. So this comes back. We just stopped them in 2016 and said, you're not building another road from here to infinity. This comes back with a rebuild, the second one, and brings along with it the new stuff. So this is what their build rebuild schedule looks like when you run it over time. Looking back in time, we could look back to that first one and see how silly that is. And if you look at any literature from the 1950s, no one was penciling this stuff out. Like, what would our great grandkids have to pay for this stuff? And then in the 80s, we just listened to one side of the discussion and didn't think through the math of it and doubled down on this. And now it's going to get bigger and bigger. We're not adding more to their system. Notice how it's capitalizing. And this isn't even inflation adjusted. And I showed you the inflation value of asphalt. So right now, this community, if you flush their money into the system, they can only afford 50% of their roads, period. Can you afford yours? Do you understand why you're broke? And we don't do the math. We just hope somebody in the future is going to solve this problem. This is a argument that I hear in every community. It's a pattern that I've seen in every place, and it's because we're not doing the math on this stuff. And I understand this is depressing. There's a way out of this. One is you want to start analyzing this stuff. Two is you want to start seeing how things operate and be honest with your citizens to show them what's happening. So Eugene, Oregon, this is their cash flow model. We did a full ROI, do the revenue, but also the cost. You can see where downtown is here. Here's the University of Eugene or Oregon, Eugene right there. And this is like a little college town area with restaurants and bars over there on the other side of the campus. This is floating the whole city in the lake and looking at the revenue coming out of the ground up here. The red stuff is the sunk cost for pipes, water, asphalt, whatever. So if you live out here, this is what you're paying in taxes, what you cost society. So if I net your revenue against your expense, we have what's in the black is net positive, what's in the red is net negative. This is the top view of the model. You can see what's net positive in black. If you lift this up like you're looking for a salamander under a rock, this is the spread of subsidy across the model, and you could see it. So to communicate with the citizens and break it down even further, and this was the staff's idea, it was a great idea to break it down into building types. We call this the Brady Bunch slide, but we have residential, low density, medium density, high density, mixed use, low, medium, high, commercial, low, medium, and high. And these are the sticker prices. So on an average basis, single family is subsidized to the tune of $1,400 an acre. That's their cost. We also understand what's going to happen politically when we put this out there. And everybody's going to be like, well, I want a house, Joe. It's like, yeah, that's great. Who wouldn't at this kind of subsidy? You know, you'd be stupid not to take it. So for Commissioners Segerblum, you know, you're building townhouses. There's actually a disincentive for you to do that. You're going to be paying more taxes than anybody else. You're going to be more efficient. But when you're fighting that system, you can't have 80% subsidy. There's like, I can't eat 80% of my diet is pizza. I love pizza, but I would have a heart attack if I did that. You know, we do this with cities. We consume 80% in a subsidy, not a good recipe for success. So we have to think of, there's the transect model of looking at a series of, the city as a series of tree rings coming from the center out. And you want to balance that out. You don't want to just have one of those tree rings being 80%. So our recommendation to them, rather than just expand their growth area, which is what they were planning on doing, is looking at ways to recycle and be more efficient inward. And there's actually lessons here. Definitely add some more stuff in the downtown. Make more of this black and gray stuff in here. But if you look at here on the north side, Crescent Village, that's doing all right. That little foothill that pops up. So find more areas to do that. One of the things that they did is they removed the impact fees in certain zones to stimulate the development in those areas. So there's lots of tools that you can have. But you have to go into this thinking, are we producing the wrong incentive? Are we seeing growth patterns that are making things happen the way that we don't want them to happen? Look to Rust Belt places. South Bend, Indiana, we did their model. Well, I'll show you some of the highlights here. This is 88 houses done in a traditional pattern. In 88 houses, this is actually one of my favorites. It's like a cul-de-sac of cul-de-sacs. This thing's amazing. But again, 88 houses. So looking at the houses, you want to look at the infrastructure, the roads, the water. We measured all of this stuff, sewer pipes. So you're looking at an annualized cost. This neighborhood, these 88 houses cost the community about $122,000 a year in maintenance and subsidy and reserve account to the system. They're paying about $21,000 in taxes. So if you take the taxes, you can see 21,000 from 122. They're basically subsidized $100,000 for the 88 houses. You do the same for these, and I'll just kind of fly through this and get it to the comparison. It's costing 79,000, and again about 22. So putting them side by side, you can see that the cost, it's 1.5 times the cost for the 1970s stuff versus the 1920 stuff. Yet your taxes are pretty much the same out of these. So the subsidy is actually 1.8 times more on the right versus the left. Same 88 houses. So just be aware of this. The pattern of how you lay things down and what it's designed like has a ramification. And don't have the hubris to think that you're better than South Bend just because you're growing. You could be repeating the same mistakes. One of my favorite mistakes that they repeated was their water system. This is their this is their population growth, and their apex year was 1963. That was their best population year ever. Then they lost population, they lost manufacturing, went to Detroit. You could lose your people. Things could shift. You could end up with climate change. All sorts of shifts could happen in the future. Don't think that you can predict the future, but here's their pipes going in the ground from the early 1900s. I'll drop a boundary when their population stops. Right about here. Would you do this? Why were they adding more pipes when their population was dropping? And the thing is like, it's not that these people are malicious or stupid or insane. They just followed a pattern. So they added more pipe without adding more people. So this is their pipe growth in blue, indexed against their population growth in red. Were their great grandparents camels in 1930? They go with so much less infrastructure. They have enough pipe to go from South Bend to my office. That's insane. So going back to 1960, they had, if you blow up downtown, 2 blocks of force main, which is the expensive pipe, and then 3 lift stations. That's the expensive infrastructure. They went from this to this. This is the amount of force main and lift stations they have. So their population was 132,000 in 1960. This is their lift stations and their force main. They grew they got older and they lost population. They lost 22% of their population. And over that same period, they added, this much lift stations and this much force main. So thousands and thousands of percent growth. And we see this all the time, that people don't look at the relationship of land use to infrastructure costs. So I'll make it real simple. If you have like these 3 properties, these are all 50-foot frontages. They all have the same amount of infrastructure dedicated to them, but they have 3 different revenue streams. One is giving barely anything. This one's giving 2 revenue streams. This one's giving 1. So as you drive by surface parking lots, you're seeing the same thing. You've got all of this committed infrastructure and different revenue. They were actually tearing houses down all over their city. And we're just like, you're just digging the hole deeper. So we ran the numbers for them. This is their model. These here are just isolating out the vacant parcels. So they are spending $2.5 million a year just to subsidize vacant parcels. Incidentally, they stopped the program of tearing houses down after this. We had to get them to cede the loss. So I need you to understand, this isn't this is just mathematical analysis that's geospatial. You need to understand the cost and consequences of this. And I'm hearing somebody's voices in the back, but I'll muscle through it. I just want to close with a matter of equity. During the pandemic, a lot of communities were wrestling with what are the equity issues in our communities. We had been doing some analysis of redlining at the time. I don't know if y'all know about redlining, but Nevada didn't get hit by it because it started in 1934. You got hit by it in other ways, but in 1934, the federal government changed mortgages from 7 years to 30 years. And in that expansion, they asked every community to analyze or to make a map of good real estate in green, desirable in blue, declining in yellow, and hazardous in red. So everybody made their own local map. And for 30 years, from 1934 to 1968, money went to different neighborhoods, went to the green and blue neighborhoods. When we were doing Kansas City, they asked us to analyze redlining, and we're just like, yeah, we could see it right here. I mean, I could show you, look at this orange right here, and it goes from orange, you cross one street, turns to yellow right there. So you go from $1 million to, let's call it $1 million an acre down to $600,000 an acre, just crossing one street. So if you pull the red line map, I dropped the red line on there as Troost Avenue is the dividing line. You can see east of Troost is heavily redlined. So when you lose that economic potency, you have a residual effect in your city. So tapestrying, again, we stopped doing redlining in 1968, and you could see every step in that map, you still have this residual effect of a loss of economic wealth and potency in the community today. And why is that happening? And I don't think we're asking the right questions about this. I don't think we're digging into it as communities to be humble enough to see how it's happening. So in our community in Asheville, my city and my county adopted a reparations resolution. So we're just like, fine, we're gonna dig into this. We had a red line map in Asheville that affected our community. So the first thing we did is we pulled a race map of my county. White people are in blue, black people are in green. Let's zoom into Asheville. And you can see this big old hole right there. That's the Vanderbilt mansion is sitting in there. What a lot of people don't realize with the Vanderbilt development is they actually developed a subdivision next to the mansion called Biltmore Forest. In Biltmore Forest, one of my favorite residents of Asheville is Sidney Powell. One of Donald Trump's attorneys lives there. And I grabbed a friend, Reggie Harrell's house. So there's Reggie. Reggie's about a half mile away from Sidney. Lives in Shiloh. His house is what it is. And Sydney's house is kind of modest. It's just a ranch burger, but it's really well done. But when you pull the numbers on it, and again, this is in our assessment, you look at the value per acre of the dirt. Reggie's dirt land value per acre is less than Sydney's. So his neighborhood is less valuable at a dirt level. When you look at the value per acre for his house, what the hell is going on here? How on God's green earth is Reggie's house more valuable per square foot than Sidney Powell? When I show this to the assessor, he's like, well, you're not being fair. She's got a bigger house. I'm like, it doesn't get cheaper by gross, like a bulk of toilet paper. She's got 4 bathrooms. Reggie's got 1. Secondly, when you look at the taxes paid, he's producing more taxes per acre than Biltmore Forest. And this is kind of insane. From the last assessment to this assessment, his value's grown up almost double what hers is. And on the property card, it says she's renovated and he hasn't. Are we asking questions properly about how we pay for government to understand this stuff? And there was a national study that happened at the same time we were doing this. And I don't know if y'all saw this. Dr. Chris Berry from the University of Chicago did a nationwide study and released all of this information, including Clark County and Las Vegas. But the lower the value of your property, the higher your assessment, the higher your value, the lower your assessment. So this is the way that it works in Asheville. If you're lucky enough to get a house for $225,000, it gets assessed at $225,000. If you buy a house of less value, you get a higher assessment. If you buy a house of more value, you get a little tax break. Did y'all know the system works that way? So what's happening is, if you look at all of your housing stock, these are our actual houses in our county. We have a few houses that are over $1 million, and we have, let's say, about 3,000 trailers at 60,000. The majority of our housing is in the center of this pile here. So if you're doing mathematics, you're going to regress to the center of the mean. So this is the center of our market. So it's going to inadvertently pull the poor up and pull the rich down. It's just dumb math. Why are we doing our tax system this way? And is this fair to the people that can least afford this? And if you look at, this is Clark County, this is y'all, you can see that you're under assessing in blue here, the top 40%, 50% of your housing is being under assessed, and you're over assessing the poorest people. You're doing the same thing. So if this is happening with an assessment, we went ahead and went back in time 20 years ago and just looked at every reassessment that's happened for the last 20 years. And this is what it looks like. So the lowest 20% of housing in my market is going up at 300%, while the richest are only at 20%. If we're clamoring about housing affordability, the first thing we should do is not just give a huge benefit to the people that don't need it. They're the wealthiest people in our community. So what's going on in our market is the poorest values are going up, was that 3 times the richest. Now, as a business owner, I know what's going on with our income. It's going nowhere near that. And we're at like 30% growth in income. So we're essentially playing checkers in a chess match. We're not understanding what's going on. And we have the computer software to analyze this stuff. This is just one of the maps of just dirt change, the land value change from one assessment to the next. And you should be able to spot something like this. See, this person's value sticking up. It's like, what's up with that? Or going into my community. This is where my office is, and this is my neighborhood across the highway. Look at the change in dirt value when you go in 2 blocks. And we showed this to the assessor. He's like, well, yeah, it's because this piece right here is a different tax neighborhood code than the stuff around it. And I'm like, it's all the same neighborhood. And he's like, no, it's a different tax neighborhood code. Have y'all ever heard of that? Is this all starting to sound like redlining at all? So when you look at just 2 properties side by side, this is the dirt under that house, and then you cross a property line, and that's the dirt change next door. So it's a 200% change in dirt value when you just cross the street. We're not understanding this stuff. At a bigger picture, back to Reggie's neighborhood, notice how all the tax neighborhoods are level. And the narrative that we've become comfortable with is, hey, Joe, you moved into that neighborhood, you set the new market value, it's risen the value up to this level. Fine, that's called gentrification. When you cross Hendersonville Road right here and you go into the wealthier neighborhood, we've clearly had 2 transactions and the rest of the value didn't get affected. Why is that? So we see standards being applied somewhat arbitrarily between neighborhoods, and this is going to affect your markets and your housing. So just to close, it's definitely classist. Is it racist? And again, these are our numbers. This is green is Black households, blue is white households. And you see that Black households are $20,000 less at their peak versus white households. But going back to that J curve, we're overtaxing Black households. The majority of Black households are being over in the penalty zone, with 2.4% of the households getting into the discount. While if you're white, you're 8 times more likely. So that's what's going on in our community. We're currently wrestling it out, if you will. And just to close, I'm showing you all of this stuff because I want you to realize that Moses didn't deliver your tax code. These are humans that have made this. We can change it, but you need to realize the tax system is actually going to steer what's going on in the market. And if you're not literate in that, or don't care to look at the tax system, you're not going to be able to deal with what's happening on the ground in your community. Our attitude is, we call this geo-accounting. We're just going to put the data on a map so people can see it and allow folks to have a conversation about it. And like your accountant doesn't care if you buy a boat, right? Your accountant cares if you can afford a boat. So put this stuff on a map, know where your money's coming from, be literate about this stuff. We're Strong Towns members. I'd highly recommend reading Strong Towns books, Chuck's books. He gets through a lot of this stuff, and we need to change the way that we're looking at cities and do your math. So thanks for your time. I know I went over there, over in my time, but
it's all right, Joe.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, I want to open it up for any questions. If folks want to drop those into the Q&A feature, please please go ahead. If any of the panelists want to hop on and ask a question real quick, feel free to do that. But we have Joe and his infinite wisdom. Let's take advantage of it.
you mind if I ask a question, or do you want to go to the audience first?
Please, Vinny, please.
Okay. So Joe, thank you so much. Awesome presentation, grappling with a lot of the stuff, a lot of differences here as well. But one thing that strikes me is, we have a lot of areas of vacant land. You mentioned Tony Shea, or the late Tony Shea. Let's say you have a piece of property, and I'm pretty sure in Vegas right now, as an example, if a developer came in and pitched it as, hey, I'm going to do this multi-story, multi-use building that's walkable to downtown, all of that. I think that the county or the city government would change the code to allow, to induce that building and make it happen. So did you have to actually attract different development companies, different construction companies? Did the development or construction companies, are they able to change the way they build? Because we have, a lot of the Spanish style ranch home builders here in Las Vegas, and we don't, in my experience, have a lot of the companies that build like these kind of mixed use developments, like you said, that can squeeze out a lot more value per acre. So what's that process like?
Well, I mean, one is, I'm not going to defend the traditional home builders too much, but you have to think about how their business model operates. They develop through a lot of brain damage, a certain relationship, and with subs, subcontractors, teams of people, and they develop a product, if you will. They're building an assembly line. And once they get into that assembly line, if it works, they've been rewarded in that system. So they want to repeat that because that's where they got their reward. They're going to argue that that's their business model. So if let me kind of change the metaphor for a second. If I get subsidized to make big gulp bottles of Coca-Cola, like 64 ounces, and I get free reign to like give them to kids in grade school, and they get to drink big gulps all day. And then all of a sudden you tell me I can't do that, or you tell me that I have to give the kids milk and not soda. I've already developed a system of soda delivery, So of course I'm going to buck that. I'm going to push back. If the consumer isn't aware that the big gulp was subsidized by the government, that it really that person was just a broker or a middleman of that big gulp, that really the government was discounting the cost of sucrose that was going into it, or fructose, corn syrup. You're going to be more aware of, all right, is that where we really want the subsidy? So if I buy this LaCroix can of soda here, I know that I'm paying for that aluminum can that this water's in. I'm going to be paying for it, right? So when we deliver cities, we've had this kind of arbitrary system that's disconnecting cost from revenue. So what you see about that red-black model, we're actually just treating it like a real business. So when I get in arguments with developers, and they're just like, well, I've got this business model and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh, how much is your company worth? And they'll tell me it's like $80 million company or something like that, or $40 million. That's a really big real estate developer if you're an $80 million company. And I'll say, well, my city's worth 14 billion. And what you're saying is I need to lose money so you can make money? Is that what I'm hearing? Let's to be honest about it. It's just like, we've given a subsidy to a product. The federal government did a report on this. I don't know if you ever heard the term cost of sprawl before. You're in the Sierra Club. Did you know the Nixon administration published a document called the Cost of Sprawl in 1973? Do you have a copy of this document? It's like, so here our federal government, the first gas crisis was like, somebody should have the math on this stuff. But if it's not understandable, if you don't understand how it operates, it's out the window. So we have to have the humility to say, how do we explain this to folks so that they get it?
Joe, two really good questions coming up. One from Nick Christensen, another one from Joan Miners, and then one from Aaron. The first one from Nick is, if we were going to do this sort of analysis in Clark County, does your model make sense, or would it make sense to incorporate payroll taxes, water use, and other factors rather than just property tax?
Sure. It depends. From a pay tax, one of the things that we do is you want to start at what does it cost to make the can? You know, it's so what does it cost to run your city? And if income taxes don't come back to the city, we don't care about it. You know, it's like that's going to the state coffers, it's going to whatever. You don't have control locally over that. You know, maybe you all do more in Nevada than we do in North Carolina, but it's like out the window, that's going to the state. We want to show how the municipality works because you actually have the most control with land use laws, political decisions. You know, back to Vinny's question, I would ask, like, why do you have to go through a zoning change to get the right thing done? You know, I'd make the wrong thing harder to go through. But in most cities, what you find, it's really easy to just go in and just go build a strip mall or a big box. I can come in and underbuild in your community. I think that we all need to set this will actually be good for you guys in Las Vegas. Make a 2-drink minimum. You know, it's like to participate in our community, we need to get at least this level of taxes out of you. And if you choose to underbuild, that's your choice. We're going to charge like a residual impact fee to make sure we're recouping our cost of road, sidewalk, all of that, you know, and just be fair about it. Does that make sense? Does that get close to answering the question?
I think so. And there's another question in that vein about looking at services such as police, fire, and EMT. And I think there's an assumption that they get more expensive the further out from the city center you get. And I think there's also, in relation to that, you know, is there an unequal and uneven distribution of those services?
Yeah, I mean, yes, is a short answer, but there are cities that have done this analysis that what's the trip distance and amount of capture of people in a radius of delivery. We tend to, and I should say we at Urban 3, but most communities that I talk with get distracted by police and fire because those are the biggest parts of the budget, but it's only because we haven't truly accounted for the cost of roads and physical stuff. And it's because we're not seeing that full replacement value. Most budgets and budget thoughts only go out 5 years. You're not looking at that replacement reserve. So if we did create a true replacement reserve, so what ends up happening with governments is they'll go out and bond for a new road rehab or a new pipe, or they'll do like a sunsetting retail tax or something like that. And that's tantamount to, imagine paying off your mortgage, then all of a sudden you have to go out and buy a new mortgage to be able to live in your house. You should be able to afford your city with the taxes you have. And the reason is most people don't realize this because the roads take 50 years to become a heart attack. So it depends on, like, you want to look at your 1970s development pattern. How much waistband did you expand in the 1970s? That's going to tell you how much trouble you're going to have in the next 10 years from an infrastructure standpoint, because all that stuff is coming due. It's even worse if you like expanded in the 80s, because you're going to be walking into an economic heart attack with that in 5 or 10 years from now. Does that make sense?
Indeed. Joe, here's another question about what types of incentives for changing a municipal code, and in this case, we'll just say the Clark County Code, to get the small developers to come in. Or, you know, I know you haven't done the analysis in Clark County yet, but what are some of the basic things that are almost standards across the nation that a municipal government can do if there is an apples to apples type of thing, aside from just kind of looking at those property taxes? But
you know, I've seen in the comments some people have like the vacant land tax, or going back to the 2-drink minimum. You know, I don't know if y'all have heard of land value taxation or Henry George. Henry George was a tax economist in the 1800s, and his simple premise is, you know, think about the flood of immigrants coming in from Europe in the late 1800s, and these cities just exploding with tenements and all sorts of stuff. Yet people could just sit on real estate and not do anything with it. And if you have land and you've got a building on it, the building is where the majority of your money is coming from because it's the majority of the value. So if I get rid of the building, I got really low taxes because it's just a surface parking lot or it's grass or something. He thought that was patently unfair. And he's like, we should at least figure out the cost of the pipes in front of that and the roads and charge a fee for that. When I talk to people about that, they're like, well, that makes common sense. So like, why didn't we do that? And the thing that I find kind of funny is that I haven't heard a lot of people who know Henry George is or the term land value tax, but it actually was like a movement across this country in the 1800s to be more egalitarian and more equitable from a revenue standpoint, to change the tax system. And everybody's like, oh my God, it's so hard to change the tax system. We can't do that. So this woman, her name is Elizabeth Maggie Phillips, invented a board game that was called the landlord's game that eventually became Monopoly. And she taught us land value taxation. The rules to winning Monopoly are location, 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 land assembly, and you put some buildings on it, right? So we learned by the time we were 12 how to do land value taxation, but somehow when we're adults, we're just like, oh, that's too complicated, Joe. We can't change the tax system. Like, no, why are we going to just bleed out like this? And let's just consciously choose where our best revenue stream should go. Do we really need a road that long? Should Vinny be able to send all of his kids to like Stanford for a summer program? Like, what's the best use of public wealth? And let's get together as adults and have a reasonable discussion about it.
Joe, I actually have a question. You showed the study, the nationwide study that was written about in the Times, and the values in Clark County between more lower income residents and higher income residents and their home values. How do you start to address something like that? I mean, do you just have to go to the assessor and say, hey, like this, like what's the matter here? How do we address
You want
this?
an honest opinion?
Of course.
Yeah, my assessor wasn't too happy with us for doing that. And we're currently wrestling with this. My county commission did an abatement program, $400,000 abatement program. We figured out that we're overtaxing the poor 1.5 million and undertaxing the rich 4 million a year. So that's a $5.5 million subsidy and a $400,000 rebate program. That's not good. It's not good at all. It's my county's choice if they want to keep that attitude. It's my choice as a taxpayer and a citizen to explain to people that my county adopted a reparations program, adopted an equity program, and they're stealing $5.5 million of money from the poor and then only giving them back 400,000. Do you as a citizen think that that's fair? I don't. So I think that we're in a stage now where the technology is here, the information is here, and there's an appetite to have that conversation. Now, I live in the South. It's not an easy thing to talk about this stuff, but I feel it's important enough to talk about. And I'm not going to be the only one. Dr. Berry's doing this stuff nationally. This is going to happen. This tax system has been in place since the 1800s. We need to think through why the power structure set up things this way. It's like zoning is the same thing. Zoning is an impediment to building local wealth. You need to have a land use attorney to get things through. Like, how is that fair for like my mom who's got a high school education? Why should she have to hire a land use attorney to like figure out what to do with her property? I'm not saying just allow every property to just sky's the limit and go crazy, but we need to understand these systems that get in place and how it inadvertently penalizes people that can least afford it. And think about it. We're going to go out. My county's talking about giving out a $3 million bond for affordable housing. Like, how about this? Why don't we stop stealing from people first instead of going out and getting another bond? It's kind of comic. So I don't know what's going to happen in my county. We're still working this out. There's an ad hoc meeting tonight. They're going to talk about it. So I'm just trying to like control myself and step back a little bit now that we've instigated as an activist, and allow my community some time to talk this through. But we're not going to give up on it.
That's really an incredible story. Do any of our panelists have any other thoughts, questions, insights that they would like to ask of
Actually,
Joe?
there's a great question in here. Can I talk about this?
Oh
real
yeah,
quick?
please.
Because I cut it from the presentation because of time, but let's get into it. Short-term rentals, love them. This is going to be good. So, let's see. Y'all are going to dig this. Okay, so y'all seriously, your county assessor has to give a report to the county commissioners on how they're doing the property tax assessment. Go ahead and download it, get a 6-pack of beer or a bottle of wine, and just kind of like wade through these things. 655 pages long. It is the most mind-numbing document I've ever seen. In defense of the poor county commissioners, it's like, who wants to read something like that? But I did. On page 20, and highlighted in blue, this is the only thing that they have to say about Airbnbs and VRBOs. So what they're basically saying is houses aren't typically used for income, like just total cop out. And so I talked to the assessor about it. He's like, how am I going to find these things? Because our county doesn't have a permit process for them. And it's like, well, you open up VRBO, there's a damn map right there. Grab one and then go to Street View, because you're going to see the pictures from inside the unit, and you figure out where it is. I spent a half hour and did it, found this one's renting for $1,000 a night. On the property card, it's listed as residential right there. And so let's look at the state law. The state law says for the land and for the building, the land, you want to look at its advantages, its income, past income, probable future. For the building, adaptability for residential, commercial, other uses, past income, probable future income. So here's the question. Was it adapted from a residential use to a commercial use? Yes, right? The assessor standards, their own standards, if it's single family residential, you use a sales approach. What was a comparable sale? If it's commercial, you look at the income approach. So I would argue that that house is commercial. It's a hotel room as far as I'm concerned. This is my neighbor's house, Black family, fixed income. He's 80 years old. I think he fought in Vietnam War. He's a disabled veteran. When you look at the dirt value per acre, my neighbor's house, the Lordman's dirt value is $500,000 an acre. This house on the side of a friggin' mountain is only 91,000. I would think that being on the side of a mountain with this view of Chun's Cove is an advantage. So again, right there in plain sight. When you look at the income, just 70% occupancy is pulling $250,000 a year. My neighbor gets no income off his property. But if you look at the taxes paid per acre, my neighbor's paying 3 times the taxes. So why is that? So back to the property, it's this person from Florida that owns it. So I looked up their property. You just go to the Secretary of State's corporation search. Here it is. It's Mountain Alchemy LLC, owned by this company called Tigger, who's owned by this guy, David Ortega. Let me kind of jump ahead. He's got a bunch of LLCs, but he's got 3 properties in Asheville that he's cash flowing as an Airbnb. Tigger LLC is this Dr. Tig here, and his wife. They have a face wrap company, which is awesome. So they're making bank in their face wrap company, and they bought some Airbnbs in Asheville. This is one of their pages bragging about their being vacation rental owners. I like that they're in Africa somewhere with the elephants or whatever. I don't know. But so when I show this to my community, I'm like, they got 3 houses. So I've got staff that are like in bidding wars trying to buy a house in our community. And there are people like this buying houses and cash flowing them. So what they can do is they can, like for the rest of us, houses are either debt or income, right? So for us regular people, we don't own the house. For 30 years, the bank owns the house. We're paying $2,500 for this house in particular. And then after 30 years, we get the house with $0. For Tig, he can drop a bunch of change down on the house and cash flowed as an Airbnb. And in 4.2 years, he's now even, owns the house free and clear. And this is all income. So he's making $6 million. off this property while the rest of us would make zero. So fine, if we want to use Airbnbs in our community, awesome, but don't undertax them. You know, it's that individual has chose to make it commercial. So one of their other houses is this one. And like the assessor's arguing with me. He's like, oh, how'd you find all these things? I'm like, look at this fucking map. Sorry for the language, but right there, here's one. I mean, it's written on the damn map. It's right there. You can find it. This is this guy, Jay Flano, that owns those. So Jay's got all of these right there. One of them is renting for $2,000. It's the bachelorette party. If anybody wants to get married, come to Asheville. This is a great place to have a party. But of this whole strip right here, all of these are Airbnbs. There's 4 of those houses are owner occupied. So when you look at the tax valuation, owner occupied in blue, Airbnbs in pink. This is the land value difference between the two. There's no difference. The building value, no difference. So they're going to be taxed at the same level, even though one's got significantly more income. And that's going to change and distort what the price of a house is in the marketplace if you've got that kind of buyer in the marketplace. So every community is experiencing this. And you know, you can get it on AirDNA, you can see where they are, you can see what the occupancy rate is per house. So back to our people in our housing stock, we're Appalachia, we're poor. We've got people that are making $10,000 in total income per household, real poor. We've got wealthy people. This is the housing stock people can afford. What you see with supply and demand is you see down here at the poor end, we've got a lot more people than available housing stock in orange. And to be fair, the same is true in the rich end, but rich people can go shopping downward. Poor people can't go shopping upward. Add to it outside the market people that are coming in and buying up housing and taking it off the market. So we've got 30% of people from Florida that buy up houses. You all have this problem with Californians, but you also have institutional investors taking about 1 in 5 houses. That's going to be a pension fund, Blackstone Realty. And so it's going to distort your people's ability to buy a house. So stepping back for a second, this is owner occupancy, non-owner occupieds in pink, owner occupieds in green for my community. And you can see we've been adding housing stock, but you see this inflection that happens. So after Airbnb is born, you start to see a swell change in that gets gobbled up by investors. And you'd be stupid not to in Asheville for the amount of tourists that we get. We get 10 million tourists a year. And then my city stupidly did a hotel moratorium, which is absolutely dumb. And that forced more of the demand into the housing stock because we weren't building hotels for a couple of years. So anyway, this is an analysis I recommend every community do, just so you're not flying blind. But it's definitely affecting housing prices and housing valuation.
This is a lot to consider, Joe, but you deliver it so artfully and articulately and in a way that just makes sense. And I think it underscores, you know, the premise that I began with is, you know, are we doing the math? And if we're not doing the math, who is that hurting? I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I'm grateful for all the diehards that have remained on during this, and you know, we'll just you know, Joe, do you have any closing statements? Anything for finishing out here, and then I'll ask some of the NGO partners some questions to close this thing out. But you know,
I think I've spoken enough. I'm good.
Well, if anyone wants to hire Joe to do an analysis for Southern Nevada, we should all talk. But you know, before we move forward on, you know, certain land use and development proposals, we should certainly be asking ourselves the question again: Are we doing the math? So, Joe, thank you so much, and you can hang on. But I'll ask Cynthia a quick question. You know, you're a mother, and you're certainly thinking about what the future holds for your child. You know, after watching this presentation what are you thinking about as it relates to the future? What type of world your son may inherit?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Kyle. And thank you for the presentation, Joe. There's so much information that you just presented us with that I'm still trying to digest. My son is turning 5. He turned 5 today. And one of the things that I think about is how if we continue with what we're currently doing, where we're growing and sprawling out and not thinking about what we're doing in our downtown area and infill, that we're going to continue to add more to the commute. And with commute and driving time, we're going to see a lot more air pollution from the vehicles. And growing up here, I don't remember seeing that much traffic on our roads as we do now. But as we continue to grow and we're having to travel longer distances and sitting on our roads much longer, our air pollution in Las Vegas has gotten worse. We went last year from being number 12 as the most polluted city in the United States to now number 11. And I worry because if we continue this way, it's going to affect our health and our children's health. And already my son has issues. I can't imagine how much worse it'll be if we continue to not think of other alternatives where we make it more, where we focus more on livable communities versus continuing to sprawl out. The other thing I'm worried about is home ownership. It's becoming something unattainable for many people. And it seems like there's a lot more people coming in and buying houses from out of state. I mean, in my neighborhood alone, in my area code, 80% of the houses are owned by investors and people are renters. So I'm certainly worried about that.
That's a pretty scary statistic, Cynthia. And, certainly something that should be considered in all of this. And I'm going to go to Olivia, after watching Joe's presentation and, plan, and plans commitments to communities throughout Southern Nevada. What are you thinking about after having listened to Joe?
Well, we've seen exemplified today and over the last several decades in this area that a pattern of development is always to build new and to build out. And when that's the priority, the communities that already exist, like we've talked about, the communities that have been around since the start of Las Vegas's history are ignored. And, the demographics in Vegas are changing, and Nevada and the country as a whole. White people only represent 51% of Nevada residents now, about maybe even less. And only 45% of the population of Clark County is white. So why are so many of our resources given to predominantly white communities, and we ignore the cultural and historical significance of neighborhoods that are inhabited by predominantly people of color? And then when we put money into rich white communities instead of funneling it into the communities of color and lower income communities, it devalues the property, like we've talked about, in the communities of color, and then the gentrification cycle starts, and that's when developers move in to buy out the cheap land, and communities and families that have existed in those neighborhoods for decades get pushed out. So I guess to answer your question, Kyle, I'd like to see existing communities receive the support that they need and that they have needed, which includes building them up instead of building out. We should be prioritizing communities like the historic West Side instead of expanding out, which would also make our public transportation easier too if we do work on infill and building up. Because in Clark County, folks have to wait 30 minutes to an hour to catch a bus to get to work. And as a result, the ridership on public transportation is low. Traffic gets increasingly worse, like Cynthia mentioned, and traffic gets increasingly dangerous. The roads are crowded and air pollution is getting worse. And we've seen that other places, like we talked about, that have been subjected to colonial development longer have dug themselves into a hole by developing poorly and developing out. And Aaron in the chat made the good point that Las Vegas is a much younger city than Asheville or Atlanta or other East Coast cities. So the time to change, to build up and to bolster existing communities is now. And there's no reason to wait and commit to sprawl when it doesn't make any sense numerically or otherwise, other than for the wallets of development executives and the Walmarts of the world. So.
Well, thank you so much for that, Olivia. And Vinny, I know I don't even have to ask you a question. I know you have some final thoughts here.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun to see, and it's challenging to see that this is a problem that's being grappled with across the country. We have the unique problems here of our water situation is such that, more further out we build, the more single family homes we have. I put this in the chat, that has an inherent landscaping need that loses water out of the system. Our game here in Las Vegas, we're not going to get more Colorado River water. We probably won't get a huge cut like a lot of those places will get. We'll get a little bit more cuts, but we can hang on if we conserve the existing water we have. We continue to recycle it inside of buildings. But the more further out that we build these landscaping, that's the additional impact that I don't, not that Joe's presentation gets into, but that's one of the key differences between a Las Vegas and an Asheville, for example, is the water situation is that much more dire and adds that much more on top of all the other reasons that he gave for why we need to go in a different direction. And I'm just left here thinking about the ways that you're talking about inverting the property tax structure and thinking, man, how is Howard going to find 2/3 of the legislature to go with this and vote for that? How is Assemblyman Watts going to find that? How is Commissioner Seegerbloom going to convince the county commissioners that represent the edges of town that actually your folks are, and I believe it, largely being undertaxed, to support the people in the urban core? We have a lot of work to do, and that's on us as organizations and on the people here on this, presentation. Not just to vote. That's kind of the minimum. I think if you're on a presentation like this, you're already voting, right? But it's getting involved with organizations, going to local meetings, lobbying, citizen lobbying, your elected officials. All of that's really, really critical. And so thank you so much for equipping us with the knowledge we need to do this work.
Yeah, Vinny, I wasn't like, I'm sort of, I guess maybe a little flamboyant about the change of tax system. I want everybody to just change our frames a little bit. Can we get there? I think so, but as long as we stretch ourselves out a little bit and say, okay, maybe we've been asking the wrong questions and seeing the world a little differently. I think the tax apparatus is part of the problem, but it's just until we start making that part of the conversation, we're not going to be successful with all these other basically symptoms of a financial problem, inequity, environmental issues, being able to afford different aspects of our communities. We've been sold a bill of goods that just doesn't financially work, and it's been set up in an inequitous manner. So we just have to kind of like have the willingness to kind of think, let's get big for a second and think, change the tax system. Will that happen? I don't know, but if I get up there from a thought standpoint is what I'm trying to do.
Well, does anyone else have any final thoughts, anything that they would like to add? If not, we can let Joe go. You certainly have some important meetings in your community tonight. And so, but yeah, speak now or forever hold your peace. All righty, everybody. Well, thank you so much, and really appreciate everyone's time. And it was a pleasure. I know I learned a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you for organizing this, Kyle.
Thank you all for coming.
And Kyle, I can hang around and we could just recap.
Yeah, that would be great, Joe.
Kyle, would you like to stop the recording?
Yes, indeed.